hosting us here. We're at the Pembina facility on the North Shore of Vancouver. And you can see behind me a giant ship that's loading up with copper concentrate from British Columbia. That ship will be going across to Asia, bringing that copper there, where it'll be turned into various products and shipped around the world. It's an example of the integrated nature of the global economy and British Columbia's contributions to it. There are a lot of workers here that help keep the global economy moving. It supports families. These are good jobs. And it's an example of the kind of work that we're going to expand. You know, we face some pretty serious threats from the United States right now, from the president, in terms of jobs that support families here in British Columbia and right across Canada. This is the site that takes in zinc and lead shipments and sends them down to the smelter and trail, where they're smelted, and they also produce critical minerals like germanium that are essential to U.S. industries like the defense industry. And if they're not purchased from the trail smelter through Teck, then they have to be purchased from Chinese firms. If you're not buying oil and gas from Canada and British Columbia, the alternative is Venezuela. We believe that we are a friend and an ally of the United States with shared values around democracy and human rights. And we've demonstrated that through generations. We want to get back on that track with the president. There's lots that we can work on together. And I am fully supportive of the conversations the Prime Minister is having with the President to try to resolve this unfortunate dispute that will only make families on both sides of the border poorer, that will only compromise prosperity on both sides of the border for Americans and Canadians alike, and will embolden those very countries that the President is trying to target as not playing by the global rule book. I am, you know, I guess over the last 24 hours, as we've gone through this period of retaliating against Americans, and we continue to support that, the absurdity of this, of allies and neighbors hurting each other, has really, I think, come home to many British Columbians and Canadians. I know people are angry and upset, and I'm angry and upset that we're being targeted in this way. And we are going to stand up. We're not going to roll over. We're not going to be the 51st state. And I know that at some point, we're going to get to that state of agreement again with the United States. But in the meantime, our province will be strengthening our domestic economy. We'll be ensuring that we're diversifying our markets around the world. Right now, major firms in British Columbia are in the process of redirecting their critical minerals, their energy products, to markets outside the United States to respond to the tariff threat. This isn't to punish the Americans. This isn't anything else. This is in response to tariffs that have been put on by the United States. And there is just no way that makes Americans, gives Americans more affordable groceries, more prosperous future, more efficient industry. But it is what BC firms will do, and we'll support them in doing that to make sure they're protecting jobs for British Columbians as we diversify our economy across the globe. It's a very serious time for British Columbians. Our government stands with you, stands with all Canadians to push back on this threat. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go to reporters that are on site and then go to the phones. One question and one follow-up. Press *1 to enter the queue. Please unmute and take yourself off speaker when we call on you so we can hear you. First up, Anaïs.
Anaïs Elboujani with CBC Radio-Canada. Hi, Premier. After the announcement of tariffs pause for Mexico for a month, would you consider putting some measures to rest if the U.S. backs down on their threats? And are you also meeting with PM Trudeau to discuss next steps today before his call at 3 p.m. Eastern Time?
So our hope for these tariffs is for the best, that the president doesn't go ahead with them. There's no question. Both Americans and Canadians will be better off if the president just moves away from the tariff threat. And I encourage the Prime Minister and I support the Prime Minister in engaging with the president to try to find ways to do that. But let's be honest with ourselves. The deal that Mexico got is a 1-month reprieve. And what we're looking at is the next 4 years of potential threats and tariffs and attacks. And what has changed for so many Canadians is almost overnight is feeling like the Americans are our friends, to feeling like the president is out to get Canada, and in particular, to try to turn us into the 51st state. And if you want to see Canadians, I mean, we have a reputation for being a chill, relaxed, kind of easygoing country. You want to see Canadians get their back up and get some things done, then threaten our sovereignty. And so we're going to make sure that we're never again in the position, certainly British Columbia is going to do this, of being so exposed to the whims of one person in the White House. So many Americans are friends and family, and we have such good relationships with them. But we're not going to take that relationship for granted. We're going to make sure that we have other deep relationships, trading relationships, so that our families are safe. We're transforming our economy to ensure our independence and our sovereignty as a province and as a country.
Do you have a follow-up?
Speeding up natural resources permitting can also, put into question our climate goals and our commitments. John Rustad said, let's take, the climate cap emission out. But what are your, what would you say to people that might worry about our environmental commitments?
We have shared values and priorities with Americans on a host of different issues. There are governors in the United States right now that are close partners with us in the fight on climate change and addressing issues of environmental protection, I think of Washington State, Oregon, and California. And so the unfortunate piece about this is that through these threats, work that we should be doing together and growing our North American economy and reducing our emissions is compromised. And so for us in British Columbia, we keep our values close to our hearts. We want to protect air and water for our kids. We want to make sure we're fighting climate change. But we're for damn sure going to make sure that our sovereignty is protected in this country and that our families are protected and they can pay their rent and they can buy their groceries. And that is our #1 priority, and it always will be.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to the phones. Rob Buffin, CTV News.
Oh, good morning. Thanks for taking my questions. Premier, I guess my first question relates to what further BC might contemplate doing, in response or retaliation. Doug Ford has announced that he is going to ban U.S. companies from bidding on Ontario contracts. And he's also canceled the Starlink contract, Elon Musk's company that exists with Ontario. Is there something similar that you would contemplate doing?
Thanks, Rob. We've already issued letters of direction to Crown corporations and across government that for procurement of major projects, and this is literally billions of dollars in spending, that will be focused, that we are prohibiting those contracts going to American firms. Now, we have a trade agreement with the United States that prevented us from putting a rule like that in place. But when the president rips up that trade agreement, says it doesn't apply and puts on 25% tariffs, then the only response for British Columbians could be, for our public money, just like for our money at the grocery store, it's going to go to countries that support and recognize our sovereignty. It's going to go to Canada first, wherever we can. And we're going to ensure that we're doing those things. And so that's already happened. We were actually looking at Starlink for our last mile completions of connection to high-speed internet for rural communities in the province, especially particularly remote and rural communities. We're no longer looking at Starlink. And I think that's unfortunate. that makes everybody worse off. But the reality is that we will not sell out our province to companies that are endorsing and supporting an economic attack on our families. We can't do it. And this isn't a fight we want. We don't want this fight. I hope the President and the Prime Minister come to terms on this as quickly as possible. But the fight has been brought to us, and we're going to stand up for BC.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I'm wondering, I guess, about a couple of things. One is Danielle Smith has said in an op-ed piece in the National Post that, you know, in terms of a Team Canada approach, she thinks to protect us from being vulnerable to the states, we need to immediately fast-track building multiple pipelines east and west in the country. I wanted to get your take on, you know, whether you would support seeing pipelines built through BC on a expedited, immediate basis, and also on a sort of related note, what's your views on banning the sale of electricity or imposing export tariffs on electricity from BC to the States?
Well, I'll take your second question first, Rob. In terms of electricity, I mean, the irony is, I don't think that in terms of our electricity customers, that the Americans are very excited about buying BC electricity. They just have to buy it. And if they don't buy it, then the lights go out. And so to put a 10% tariff, which I assume is applying to electricity, we still don't know all the details, on that electricity, it just means the Americans are paying more for the electricity that they have to buy. They're putting a tax on themselves. And so it doesn't require us to do anything else. These things are going to be obvious to Americans immediately when they open their power bills, whether they're industrial customers or residential customers. They're going to be paying 10% more for their electricity overnight starting on Tuesday. That's the absurdity of these tariffs. It doesn't make any sense. They're punishing themselves. And so it's the goal of delivering messages like that. I'll continue to reach out with American media to talk to American consumers. We're going to Washington, D.C. to deliver this message to key decision makers. In terms of pipelines and energy projects, I think that the perspective that we need to take as Canadians for all of our products, this includes businesses and individuals and provinces, all of us, is twofold. One is we need to do a much better job of trading between provinces. You know, we just reached an agreement with Alberta around wine. So that BC wine can flow direct to consumers in Alberta. That is the smallest piece of what we need to do to be trading with Canada first. We need to get rid of all those trade barriers across the country, and that's the instruction my ministers have around the table to work with premiers to do that. The second is, it doesn't matter what the product is, we should be looking at how we get that product to other markets. Now, for pipelines, those projects, even expedited, are going to take years to put in place. Using the infrastructure we have the Trans Mountain Pipeline just down the road here, using it to ensure that we can get those ships to Asian markets and not just to American markets, that we're using the full capacity of these things to ensure our sovereignty is critically important, as well as not just to see this as exclusively an oil and gas issue. This is a Canada issue, all of our products, looking at those other markets around the world where they want our products is going to be a priority for all of us and certainly for me.